I should probably clean up the glasses.
Oh, then just start whenever you're ready.
Hey, you guys. How goes it? I like my shirt. Eracism. It's a new word. Here's what it stands for. Can you read that? Eradicate racism. Commit your life to doing that. All right. And I hope that you've been like putting this into practice. Have you been monitoring sort of your automatic think and noticing when there's judgments there, which there almost always are, and have you been paying attention to that? And hopefully, as you've caught yourself gossiping about people in your brain, let that serve as just a post-it note to remind you what you're supposed to be doing, and that is loving them, agreeing with God that they have unsurpassable worth because Jesus thought they were worth dying for. Now that's the number one job of the disciple. You've got to take captive the 3.5 pounds of noodles between your ears if you ever think you're going to change the world. The trouble is that people want to go out there and change the world, and they haven't done much between the ears. And when people with broken thought patterns and broken hearts go out and try to fix the world, we inevitably just further break it. Gandhi said it right when he said, be the change you want to see in the world. Before you try to change anyone or anything, change yourself. And for the Christian, that means bring everything into conformity with Christ. So be paying attention to your thought. That is your first responsibility. And make sure that you are, in fact, bringing everything captive to the love of Jesus Christ. So everything is in congruity with that. All right, so I want to talk a little bit, first talk today is going to be on love and religion. So here's the thing. As I've said, the human race is estranged from God. There's this rebellion in our primordial past that brought us into captivity to the principalities and powers, and it's been that way ever since. And when we're estranged from God, we're not getting our life and fullness and worth and significance from God, and it's a non-negotiable need. And so the world becomes a feeding frenzy of idols. Everyone is competing to get the thing that can fill them. We all want to have worth. Everyone wants to have significance. And what drives the world? And you needing to feel important is not a sin, because you're supposed to feel the need to be important because you are important, because God thinks you're important. But that sense has got to be filled by what God thinks about you, not by how great you are, or smart you are, or sexy you are, how good you can throw a football, or whatever. Those are all idols. Anything that plays a role in our life that only God's supposed to play is an idol. And anything can become an idol. Anything. If you're getting worth from it, if your core sense of worth from it, that's an idol. So there are secular idols and there are religious idols. Secular idols are those, people working 18-hour days on Wall Street, getting their $4th billion to get their 4th mansion and 5th yacht, and so on and so on and so on. It's amazing the amount of wealth that they can accumulate. Do you know that the richest 85 people on the planet own more than the bottom half of the planet, the almost 4 billion people that are on the lower half of the economic hierarchy? 85 people own more than 4 billion. That's quite astounding. And something is true in America: the top 1% own more wealth than the bottom 50%. But they work so hard. They're driven because they got a get this need. I just found out the other day that someone had reported to this one CEO of this major company that their $4 million yacht had been stolen. And the person's response was, "Which one? I've got 17 yachts." Who needs 17 yachts at $4 million apiece? Anyways, that's one way of getting life. The secular way of getting life is where you just you scrape for life, but whatever advantage you have, whatever you happen to be good at, you work it. And then that sets in place, your own version of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Because you will judge what is good as that which gets you what you want, and that what is evil is what prevents you from getting what you want or what threatens what you want. So the secular ways of doing it, and then the religious ways. Of course, the religious people who are into religious idolatry, we judge those secular people. Look at those heinous people. Who needs 17 yachts? Crying out loud. Although that is very judgeable. But yeah, I'm not saying that. She's unsurpassable worth, this CEO, and it is a female. I heard about this on the news. but that is a little much. But she has unsurpassable worth, and she's just trying. See, she's just trying to feel fully alive. That's what everyone's trying to do, and she thinks 17 yachts will do it for her, and whatever else she's got. But it won't. Nothing satisfied. So the religious idols look a lot better, but they're not. In fact, they're actually worse, precisely because they look better, and they're a lot easier not to notice. The religious way of getting life, idolatrous life, is to, you think that what makes you okay is that you believe the right things and you do the right things. Whatever the right things happen to be according to your group. And that's how you impress God. You get God to like you by doing these things. That's what the essence of religion has been about. To get the God or the gods on your side by what you do, by believing the right things, by doing the right things, making the right sacrifices, blah, 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 blah. And you set yourself off over and against all those who do the wrong things and who believe the wrong things. Religious idolatry. But while it looks better, it's actually pernicious. And in my opinion, Christianity is infected with it, religious idolatry. Here's an analogy to get at the difference between religious idolatry and then having the fullness of life in Christ. So, you know what a sociopath is? Oh, you do? Okay, good. It's really kind of hard to get used to talking to a camera. I have to admit, I have to try to imagine you're sitting out there. Hello there, Johnny. It's like, you guys are too young for this, I'm sure, but back when I was a kid, they had this thing called Romper Room. Scott, do you remember Romper Room?
No.
No, you didn't have it? Well, this lady would talk on the screen, and she'd hold up this magnifying glass, and she would say, and I see Bobby, and I see Susie, and I see Greg. And as a kid, if your name got called out, it happened to me once. It's like, she sees me. I'm valid. I have worth. Why was I getting on that? I forgot. I did take my meds today, but it's a sociopath is someone who is vacant on the inside. It's the only way I can describe it. Someone who has they don't have that kind of interiority that a normal person has. They are unable to empathize with others, to imagine what it's like to be them, to see things from others' perspectives. In fact, a true sociopath doesn't have any of the kind of genuine emotions that a regular person has. They don't know like the meaning of the word love. The meaning that would have for them is simply a set of behaviors. To love means you have these because all they know are the behaviors. They don't have the inside of it. They can be scary people. I worked at a home for very troubled youth. These kids who have been in and out of the prison system and come from terrible abusive backgrounds. And there's one girl here who was a sociopath, Carol. And it was amazing to watch her because, see, a sociopath, precisely because they lack the internal world of others, people are just like objects, means of getting what they want. And they would have no qualms about doing whatever they need to do, including killing a person, if it would get them what they want and they thought they wouldn't get caught. So but because they lack the internal world, they're experts at noticing the behavior that goes along with a certain concept, like love. You can, if you don't have the internal world, you study the behaviors of those who do, but you don't know that they do because all you know is the behavior, and they become experts at it, and they can be supreme manipulators. Like this Carol was just. I saw her one time. She wanted something from this other girl, and this other girl had her boyfriend break up with her or something, and so Carol came over and was talking to her so perfectly. Her voice was lower. I'm so sorry, and she even looked like she was going to cry, and she just was, getting close to her. But it was all because she wanted this thing from her. And then when she finally asked for this thing, and the girl said no, Carol turned on a dime and went after her in the most vicious way you could imagine. Turning out that she had gotten the boyfriend to break up with her just out of spite, and it was just cruel and vicious. That's a sociopath. So imagine a sociopath who, for whatever reasons, decides that the way that they can get life is by being, let's say, a perfect husband. So a man who he'll get what he wants if he can just be a perfect husband. That's his idol, and so Now, he lacks the kind of internal world that is necessary for a guy to be a perfect husband, loving, caring, sympathetic, and all that kind of stuff. But this person, not knowing that they lack that, they think it's just about behaviors. So in order to become the perfect husband, this person studies model husbands and does research on them and videotapes them and notices how they inflect their voice in this situation and this situation. The husband puts his arm around and their head tilts a certain way and their eyes glass up, and he studies that behavior perfectly and just gets it down. Now, if he starts dating people, and initially people would think, wow, this is the catch of the century. Sounds like the perfect husband because he says all the right things, does all the right things. So attentive and so caring and compassionate, because the person's got the behaviors down. But if they actually married this person, I submit to you that, and hopefully it would happen before they get married, but at some point I would think that the spouse would begin to notice that something's off. They would notice it's too perfect. It's too predictable. The person's too predictable. It's like they begin to notice that it's like every behavior they do just pushes a button that causes this husband to always respond in the same way. Life is never perfect, and it's never totally routine. There's always spontaneity. There's always differences. There's always imperfections. And you begin to notice that. And she began to, I think, realize that she's not really married to another person so much as she's married to a bundle of rules. This person is a walking, talking package of shoulds and oughts. What to do in this situation, what to do in this that situation. I bet it would start to drive her crazy. Every time that she says, gosh, I'm feeling worried, he has that same exact arm around her, tapping her 4 times on this, saying, don't worry, honey, it'll be whatever, but it'll be too predictable, start to drive her crazy. She's married. She's not really relating to a person, she's relating to a bundle of rules, behavioral rules. Laws, you might say. Laws on what it is to be a good behavior. And I think it would start to drive her crazy. A truly good husband would not just be the one who has all the right behaviors, but has the inner world that fuels those behaviors, that has the genuine love, the genuine compassion, and all that. And they would maybe say a lot of the same things that this sociopathic husband is saying, but it would vary. It wouldn't be as perfect. It wouldn't be as predictable. It wouldn't, sometimes you wouldn't tap her 5 times, you tap her 6 times, or not at all. I mean, because every situation is a little bit different. See, this is sort of what the difference is between religion and the kingdom. All right, religion is a bit like the sociopathic husband. So here's the thing: the Bible says that we are all dead in our sin. Ephesians 2:1, Ephesians 2:5, that we are dead in our trespasses and sin. And I take that to mean, at the very least, that we are incapable of bridging this relationship with God on our own. In fact, we're a corpse. When it comes to our making on our own movements towards God's, we are corpses. We're not just wounded. It's not just a hard task. It's impossible because we wouldn't want it. A corpse doesn't want anything. A corpse is just a corpse. And so if we're spiritual corpses on our own, we don't on our own have anything in our inner world that corresponds to God. And so we have this void. And I guess good sociopaths, we try to meet that void by manipulating our environment, whether it's religious or whether it's secular. And see, what can happen is if we choose religious idols, and we are now spiritual sociopaths, we're separated from God, we'll choose the rightness of our beliefs and the rightness of our behaviors, and that's how we're going to get our life. And because we lack the inner reality of it, we might study, become experts on the behaviors that are that accompany walking with God or being right with God, and we'll become experts at that. We might become judges of that, as this husband, no doubt, the sociopathic husband, since he studied it so much, and he knows he would be an expert at noticing when someone's imperfect. Oh, that's not a perfect husband. He didn't tap the shoulder 5 times. And see, he's setting up his whole tree of the knowledge of good and evil. He's got his own version of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And he's assessing and evaluating and critiquing everything through that lens. Wherever you find the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, you find somebody who is medicating themselves and feeding themselves by what they can manipulate in their outside world, what they can get. and all this stuff. So it's built into the very concept of religion that there's this. They have a grid through which they're assessing behaviors and evaluating things, and doing this also that they can be the ones who can say we believe the right things and we do the right things, as opposed to those heretics and those sinners who do the wrong things and believe the wrong things. And we become experts at that because it's our form of life. And so there's an intrinsic tendency on religion to be judgmental. If your strategy is to feel like you're the ones who are right with God because of these things here, well, then you become experts at it, and you notice when people don't have that, when people fall short of that. And judging that is part of what feeds you. It's like, we're the special folks, because look at those folks. We may not be perfect, but at least we're not like them. And so we can set ourselves up as the moral police of society. And the judges who will tell people how righteous or how unrighteous they are. We're eating of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and we're bending it to our own favor. But what we need to notice is that those judgments are arbitrary. It's like, because it's fueled by an inner vacancy, the judgments all have to, we always will be bending the tree of the knowledge of good and evil to our own favor. Whatever will serve to give us life. And we won't even know that we're doing this. It just happens instinctively. So for example, some of the major sins that are most frequently mentioned in the Bible and that are most emphatically denounced are ones that religious people, I was thinking here specifically of Christians, tend to minimize. Idolatry, gluttony, greed, gossip. Those are the big ones. All over the place they're mentioned, but religious Christians don't say much about that. In fact, the number one reason why God judged nations in the Old Testament was idolatry, but right after that was greed. They did not share what they have with the poor. Even Sodom, like we always diagnose, like the judgment of Sodom and Gomorrah was about homosexuality. But if you look at Ezekiel 16, I have it here somewhere. I'm sure I do somewhere. Where is it? Here it is. It says, "As I live, says the Lord God, your sister Sodom and her daughters have not done as you have, and your daughters have done." Talking to the Israelites here. "This was the guilt of your sister Sodom. She and her daughters had pride, excess food, and prosperous ease, but did not share with the poor and the needy." And so, I did a sermon once called, "Will the Real Sodomites Please Stand Up?" And everyone thinks that it has to do with homosexuality, but it has more to do with the fact that they didn't share. They were greedy. They were not hospitable. I'm censoring all sorts of stuff I could go right now about America and its anti-immigration sentiments and all that. I'm just going to set that aside. I'm going to censor that because that would get me off track. But so the things that are major on, we tend to minor on, and the things that are relatively minor in the Bible, we tend to major on. So here's the thing. So like in the Western church, in the Western church, 70% of the people are overweight and 30% are obese. And yet we hardly ever say anything about that. Well, there's 40,000 people who die every day because of issues related to malnutrition, or they just starve to death. We tend to live we in America tend to live 4 times the global average, and yet the average American gives 97.5% of their income to themselves. We, on average, give about 2.5% of our way to charity and things like that. But we really feel good about giving that 2%, like we're really being generous there. And for evangelical Christians, it goes up about 0.5 percentage point. We tend to give 3% of our income away. Woohoo! And so now we got really good reason to brag. See, the thing is that this is what inclines us to then want to pass laws against other people's sin, but not against our own sin. We're like the sociopathic husband who, we're experts at noticing what's in our favor to notice, and not notice the things that are not in our favor to notice. So we try to pass laws, become the moral police of society, pass laws against other people's sins, but never against our own sin. And on our own sin, we tend to be very compassionate. We would say, well, look at, there's a lot of, we now know that there's a lot of things that go into a person being obese. It's not just that they choose to eat a bunch of food. We're now finding that people who tend to be obese have different bacteria in their stomach, and their food gets absorbed differently, and the messaging going to the brain to shut off isn't working, often isn't working the way it's supposed to work, and there's all sorts of reasons for that. And those are legit. Those are legit. But we don't do that for, let's say, gay people. That's all in the whole church tradition. That's always been our scapegoat. However bad we are, at least we're not like them. Even though we find homosexuality mentioned 3 times in the Old Testament and possibly 3 times in the New, Romans 1 and 1 Timothy 1 and 1 Corinthians 6. And there's some discussion about what that word means and all those kind of things. But by comparison with what we find on greed and gluttony, idolatry, and things like that, it's very, very minor. But it doesn't matter. Our value systems doesn't have to have anything to do with the Bible. In fact, it doesn't have, in religious Christianity, it has nothing to do with the Bible or the priorities of the Bible. It has to do with what will feed us and what will work for us. And so you can preach against gays and try to pass laws against gay folks and LGBTQ, the whole crowd, and you're not likely going to lose that many people in your congregation because 1 to 3% of the population falls in that category. But if you go after greed and gluttony and gossip and really crack down on those, well, you know what? You might be thinning out the crowd. Some people might get offended. They'll go to a church where they're not going to confront that kind of truth. And so we have this major difference here. Now, why is there this difference between what the Bible says and what religious folks tend to do? Well, it has to do with what feeds us, what works for us. You see this with divorce and remarriage. Jesus clearly says several times in the Gospels that divorce, all divorce and remarriage involves adultery. Adultery. Because God's ideal from the start was to have one sexual partner for your entire life. That's his ideal. And anything short of that is technically adultery. Or, if you're not married, fornication. Sex before marriage. And that's true even if you just think about having sex with a person. Jesus says, if you look on a person and lust after them, you've committed adultery in your heart. Now that's God's ideal. Now, Jesus here isn't, I don't think, he's not like pulling back the permission on divorce from the Old Testament, tightening the belt on the law, so to speak. His purpose here is he's arguing against those who think they have justified grounds for divorce. And so they're like feeling righteous because they divorced their wives for the right reasons as opposed to those scoundrels over there who divorced their wives for the wrong reasons. And Jesus says, nonsense! Go back to the beginning. What was said in the beginning? What God's joined together, let no one put asunder. There's a one fleshing that goes on there. And so divorce should never happen. But in a fallen world, it does. And as we see throughout the entire Bible, God, when we're not capable of having his ideal, God has to accommodate to meet us in the real. Which he's always willing to do, and to start with where we're at in order to begin to move forward. But I bring this up just because it's so clear there, and yet that's hardly ever, the church has no issue saying, oh no, divorce is a complex thing, and people are going through painful things, and so we accommodate that. We welcome that. But we won't even enter the thought process in a lot of areas anyways about why we don't have the same sort of attitude towards gay folks. In fact, to this day, I don't know when you're watching this, but very recently here, the Supreme Court just allowed for this guy to refuse to serve wedding cakes for gay people who want him to make wedding cakes for him. I imagine Jesus doing that. So this is what's going on with the sociopathic religion. We minimize our sin and maximize the sin of others because we're feeding off of it. And here's what we need to remember, as I shared in a previous filming, that Jesus tells us to do the exact opposite. The exact opposite. Whatever you see in another person's life that is imperfect, falling short, well then that's a mere dust particle, considered a mere dust particle compared to the tree trunks that you have coming out of your own eyes. The thing is, one of the most pernicious things about sociopathic religion is that it actually trains people on how to be expert judges. To the point where you're trained to notice the fault and then trained to think that that's less than your fault. and sometimes trained to feel guilty if you don't point out that fault. I had a person who, this is several years ago now, but came up to me at the end of a service and said to me, he said, well, some gay people moved next door. I go, wonderful. And she goes, well, what should I do? And I go, what do you mean, what should you do? Bring them a cake, welcome them to the neighborhood. And then she goes, well, won't that? I first asked her, would you have this question if the people moving next to you were obese or greedy or idolaters because they love their car more than they cared about people? Or would you any other fault? Would you have this question? The answer is no. Well, then why do you have it on this one? And it's because she was trained to have it on this one. She's not trained to have this hypervigilance when it comes to all of her own sins and the sins of her tribe, because they're trained not to notice those. They're trained to notice the ones they don't have, and the ones then are the deal breakers, the big ones. Whoa. And then in her thought to not tell them, hey, I don't agree with your behavior or your life, makes you feel guilty. She was saying, should I tell them that I don't approve of that because I'm a Christian, a follower of Jesus? And my response to her was, why would you do that? Did they ask your opinion on what you thought about that? And would you feel this way if there's any other imperfection that we're talking about? And the answer is no, you wouldn't feel this way. You wouldn't feel like, I got to point out to that person that I don't think you should be that fat. The Bible says gluttony is a sin. That's rude. That's rude. It's not loving. Paul says love is never rude. And so no, collapse your judgment mechanisms and just look at them through the eyes of Jesus. Look at them in terms of that new creation where all things are created new because Jesus' death on the cross changed everything and God has claimed everyone. Look at everyone through the eyes of the love of the kingdom and try to see what God sees, the unsurpassable worth that's there. And that God's not holding anyone's sin against them. Our message to the world is not, here's your sins, repent of that or go to hell. Our message is, God's not holding anyone's sin against them. He's given to us that same message of reconciliation, 2 Corinthians 5. And to be able to announce that, to show the supreme love of God that draws people into the kingdom. To put that on display is just so beautiful and so important. But to do that, we've got to collapse all of that judgment. All of this brings us back, I'll close with this, brings us back to this fundamental point. The only way to not be a sociopath is to not be a sociopath. It's to actually get the life and the worth and the significance and the security that you need from God. Because of what Jesus did on the cross and the sending forth the Spirit, we now are able, though we were dead in our sin in and of ourselves, we are now empowered to see the true God, to see who he truly is, as opposed to all the deceptive pictures we've ever had before, and to see what he really thinks about us, and to be drawn into his love, and to surrender our life to him, and now to have that life source opened up again, so that we can drink deeply of that. And that is what frees us from the need to try to get life from anything we do out here. It's what frees us from the need to cling to idols. It's what frees us to be truly free. Because whom the Son has set free is free indeed. Get your life from Christ. God bless. I got lost a couple of times, but
Hey, it's fine.